Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities and Miniatures. It is Friday, and if you don't know, Friday is a time that we like to take a moment to set aside all of the 3D printed resin, plastic, pewter, lead, well maybe not lead models, that we have clogging up our tabletops for gaming purposes or painting purposes or collecting purposes or whatever, and we like to reflect on one of the finer things in life, and that is obscurities in literature. And so today's book is one that I don't even know how I stumbled across. I have a bad habit of that. I want to say it was actually a recommendation from Amazon. And as much as I detest Amazon at times, they are pretty on point when it comes to giving me good recommendations of things that I might enjoy, which is even funnier because I don't actually have an Amazon account, I think. I always use my wife's, but my own computer, which my wife never uses, is where I found this. And today we have manga Kamishibai. And Kamishibai, if you're not familiar, as the title says, is the art of Japanese paper theater. And what's kind of cool is the cover here actually opens up and unfolds, and I'm not going to bother because we'll let you surprise yourself if you decide to follow in my footsteps and check this out. But it does have all kinds of interesting pieces of art. So you can already tell, looking at this, I've always been a big fan of very retro futurism, retro future, ideas of the future in the past type of thing. And when I saw this, you've got monsters, you've got Golden Bat, who is probably one of the very first superheroes. You've got, primitive kids and propaganda stuff and everything under the sun. But this was absolutely the kind of thing that was going to get my attention. And I forgot where I was going with my original ramble here. But probably most of you, at least if you're not really familiar with having spent any significant time in Japanese bookstores, probably haven't experienced Kamishibai, or if you've ever had kids regularly attending school in Japan. And this is something that I saw a lot of times when my kids were little in the summer. Saw it quite a few times at local bookstores, kind of having local events, much like our Borders or Barnes & Nobles used to do back in the day. And it was always quite entertaining, and as an educator myself, and as somebody who's always kind of narrating and telling stories to children, it always kind of vibed with me, and I could kind of feel where the interest and excitement came from, because not only was it the visuals that really would attract the crowd, it was the narrator. So as we look closer into the book, and one of the things I absolutely adore about this book, it's got a Frederick L. Stott intro there. Got a nice big glossary of terms. We can see here an actual Kamishibai. What's it called? The Butai, I believe. And as you can see, it's not very technologically advanced, and actually that was the case. It's basically a stand or display that has nicely, brightly painted pictures that are going to accompany a narrated story. So you can see like the narrator standing right here as all of the kids are absolutely enthralled. And this picture probably is looking like the early 1930s when this kind of really took off, at least according to the book. So lots of photographs, but even more interesting are just lots of the pieces of art that they came across here. We've got a Golden Mask chapter. And what's really cool is we actually have all of the various pieces, because what would happen is, much like as a parent might read a book to a child, for a read aloud, or if you spend any time on YouTube watching people tell stories in a much more high-tech fashion, it's quite similar in that, you show the picture and you're narrating to them or something. If you grew up with like reading Rainbow, like some of us here in the States probably did, where Geordie LaForge was obviously narrating on a weekly basis to us. But, having gotten to see some of these performed is always quite entertaining and interesting, because it's not just the pictures, it's not just the story, but the narrator themselves, is quite dynamic, quite engaging, making faces, making voices, moving around, trying to get the kids' attention. Because let's be honest, at least in the early days, it was mostly children that were really interested. But what really got me was they make mention, and they do actually get into this quite a bit in the book, is that during the occupation of Japan, the Kamishibai were actually kind of used to help kind of send out all that information, let everybody know what was going on, and they've got some examples of that in the book too. So as I said, we have all sorts of serials here, and again, you can see these big, gorgeous looking illustrations of just all kinds of crazy stuff, and the cues visually that they were taking from Hollywood. But the thing that always gets me is looking at these illustrations, and if you spent a significant amount of time watching older serialized, tokusatsu, superhero, action, sci-fi genre shows from Japan, especially Toei stuff, you often saw these kinds of illustrations when they would have a narrator kind of interject and explain something that wasn't really relevant to the overarching plot or the main character. Like if they were going to talk about a distant planet that some other character came from, you'd get kind of a Kamishibai style explanation with a bunch of paintings and, the narration to go with it. Very Metaluna mutant looking creatures here. And again, we have the running commentary of what's actually supposed to happen in the story. We don't so much get the actual narration of what would have happened, which is a bit of a shame. But we do get the overall story. The author tends to kind of interject a lot of puns and modern commentary, which some people may enjoy, some may not. We get some of the period pieces, and that was one of the cool things about Kamishibai is a lot of this stuff is kind of before the manga boom of the 60s, but you have a lot of artists that are actually also working in this genre. Shigeru Mizuki is the big one, Gegege no Kitaro's author. We get into the history of Kamishibai and where the origins of a lot of Japanese artwork and storytelling come from. We get into the 30s and 50s and all of the exciting things. And I mean, just the angles, the shots that they're putting together. I mean, you could tell that they had some very talented artists behind these. The Cry of the Andes. Bit of background on a lot of the artists. Mizuki Shigeru. Now what's really interesting is when we start to jump ahead, there's actually an entire section in here besides all the crazy sci-fi stuff. Post-war, dealing with the collective grief, drama, and struggle, and seeing how people are using a much different style and actually still using Kamishibai to explain just what happened is pretty impressive, actually. And then what's even wilder is there's a whole section on Imperial Japanese propaganda style Kamishibai. And again, we have full sets of the storyboards, or whatever you want to call the individual plates. And then we get into, eventually, the occupation era stuff. And you have the kid saving his money like a good little boy so he can be more Americanized, and just interesting stuff. And then we have the eventual decline as manga and TV take over everything. But there's a lot in between there, and obviously we're not going to spoil everything for you, but just to give you guys a good indicator of, something interesting, something different. And with the holidays right around the corner, if you need a interesting gift for somebody perhaps that has an interest in manga and its history, might be a good choice. And if you just have an interest in the arts in general, especially stuff that maybe isn't as well preserved as it could be, they do have a thing here in the back, teachers, educators, artists, authors doing it. I know there was like a little poll spot set up in one of the local areas near where my in-laws live, where they can do them and have it all set good to go. But anyway, just interesting stuff, something different, something fun, and something hopefully you guys are going to enjoy as much as I do. So with that said, This has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we will see you back here soon. Bye-bye.